call the August 16th, 2022 Longmont City Council study session to order. Remember that this meeting can be viewed on the live stream at www.longmontcolorado.gov. Also at the city's YouTube channel, www.longmontpublicmedia.org. Can we have a roll call, please?
Mayor Peck.
Present.
Councilmember Hidalgo-Ferring.
Here.
Councilmember Martin.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Rodriguez.
Here.
Councilmember Waters. Here. Councilmember Yarbrough.
Here.
Mayor, you have a quorum.
Thank you. Let's stand for the pledge, please.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We usually have the city manager's report, but assistant city managers, are you going to give one tonight or?
No reports tonight,
No
Mayor
reports.
Peck.
Thank you. So as a message to the public, anyone wishing to speak at public invited to be heard will need to add his or her name to the list outside the council chambers. Only those on the list will be invited to speak. Do we have any council members that have motions to direct the city manager to put things on future agendas? No. So we do have a couple of presentations, but let's do the public invited to be heard first. The first person on the list is Margaret Worth. Can you please come up? You have 3 minutes and state your name and address, please.
Good evening, City Council. I'm Margaret Worth. I live at 2305 Bob White Lane, and I wanted to just make a quick comment on the lack of diversity of public waste receptacles on Main Street specifically. It's an area that my friends and I frequent. It's a great spot to get a snack, get a drink, hang out, support local businesses as well. But last time I was there, I noticed that most of the receptacles there are just trash. I only noticed one recycling bin, and it took me a while to find it. And I noticed a very unfortunate lack of compost, which I think is sad. Sustainability is one of my biggest focuses. It's something that's very important to me, and I would love to see that be more present in Longmont and the downtown area. Another comment I'd like to add is the new Sweet Cow that was just put in. I've noticed it's brought a lot more people into the area, and the containers that the ice cream comes in are actually compostable, but then there's nowhere to compost them. So I think that would be very important to have that downtown so people are just more aware of it and are more likely to compost and recycle instead of just throw things away, because that's the easiest thing and there's a receptacle right there. So I just wanted to bring that to the city's attention. So thank you.
Thank you, Margaret. Great comments. The next is Lance Whitaker.
As you know, I've been here before.
Lance, would you mind stating your name and address, please?
Of course. My name is Lance Whitaker, 1750 Collier Street, Longmont, Colorado, longtime resident, active Libertarian voter. I'm in here in support of House Bill 191230, Section 7, 44, 12408, subsection 2A, as you all know. And like to tell you guys, today is National Tell a Joke Day. So I would encourage you all to tell each other a joke today. And I look forward to hopefully bringing you a Sunday comic lineup in my future endeavors. You hope people have a nice day, and I won't bother you for any more time.
Thank you, Lance.
You're welcome.
Seth Miller.
Guys, my name is Seth Miller. I live at 1025 Neon Forest Circle in Prospect. And I'm also, in addition to being a Longmont resident, I am the convener of a group called Northern Colorado Partners for Clean Energy. And on the eve of our visit from our esteemed colleagues at PRPA, I just wanted to talk for a moment and say that, Biden today signed the Inflation Reduction Act. And I'll be honest, I'd be having the same message whether he did or not. But with the Inflation Reduction Act, we have new tools to be able to accelerate the transition to renewable energy and to clean energy and to get the carbon out of our economy. And moving our electricity to clean and renewable energy is absolutely important, but we can do things in Longmont in particular in order to be able to clean up the economy further. We have new tools that will allow us to electrify vehicles. We have new tools that will allow us to accelerate the transition to electrical homes. We have the ability to be able to allow PRPA to take market share from Excel's natural gas, to take market share from Exxon in selling oil, to be able to move the entire economy away from carbon. And so the question is, what can we do now that we weren't able to do yesterday in order to accelerate this? How do we accelerate new housing to be able to move to entirely electrical utilities? How do we move folks into electric vehicle? What should we be doing to add or not add solar to homes, which I'm sure the folks at PRPA have some sincere opinions on? We have these tools, and so what I would ask council as we're listening and talking about renewable energy today, to just ask ourselves, what can we as Longmont do to be able to make PRPA bigger, to be able to take all of the other sources of energy and move it over to the ones that we know are going to be green. Thank you.
Thank you, Seth. So that closes public invited to be heard, unless there is anyone in the chamber who would like to make a comment. Seeing none, we will close that public invited to be heard. Do we have any special reports or presentations, Don? Thank you. We are now at our study session items. The first one is an update from Platte River Power Authority, and I would like to ask David Hornbacher to please come.
Hi, good evening. I'm just looking for the presentation here. There we go. Do we have it all up? All right, Don? Great, thank you. Good evening, Mayor Peck and members of City Council. I'm Dave Hornbacher, the interim assistant city manager here. And tonight we're going to have a study session chat really about Platte River and about the resource planning update that they're going to provide. So about Platte River. So just at a glance, Platte River was formed in 1973. It was really formed by the four owner-member communities of Longmont, Loveland, Fort Collins, and Estes Park. It was formed for the express purpose to deliver wholesale energy and transmission to these four communities. And so they have been doing that now for 4 decades. And it's a large enterprise. When you look at the 2022 budget of $280 million, so that represents quite a bit of electrical energy being dispersed amongst these four communities. And with Platte River has an 8-person board. And so on that board there are 4 of the members. Each are the mayors from the individual communities. And the other 4 members are as designated by their city councils. And so I'm so Mayor Peck is on the board as well as myself as a designated member from the city of Longmont. And so, Platte River has been doing this for many, many years. And I think still today they are the lowest wholesale transmission energy and transmission providers in the state of Colorado. And what that means to our community as well as other communities is that lower cost energy really helps fuel our economy and helps provide opportunities for our citizens. In fact, the city of Longmont has the second lowest municipal electric rates, residential rates, in the state of Colorado. And that is, in part because of the cost of energy that we get to this community. The electric load is continuing to grow. And even as one of our inputs tonight was about growing that load and the benefits of that. And so, the load is continuing to grow. And in fact, last year, Platte River reached an all-time peak of 707 megawatts, and right towards the end of July. So right now we're seeing that as a summer peak. At the same time, the city of Longmont had our all-time high on that same day too. So these four cities are sort of mirroring, obviously, what Platte River is seeing and the resources that they're gathering and applying to provide energy to this community. And so, all of this is said also as they are transitioning to a renewable energy resources, of which you're going to hear more about tonight and sort of where that is. And so just a little snapshot about the four owner communities. So you can see from this slide that sort of cutout of the pie is really the city of Longmont. And so projected in year 2022, Longmont's electric load overall represents about 26% of the overall load that Platte River serves to these communities. And so with that short overview, I'd like to now turn it over to Jason Frisbee. Jason is the general manager and CEO for Platte River Power Authority, and I'll have him come up and he can go over the agenda that they're going to present, and he also has several of his staff members with. So with that, Jason.
Thanks, Dave. To the right? Okay. How much time do we have tonight? I want to be respectful. 15, 20 minutes?
Sure, as much time actually as you
Okay.
need to make this presentation.
Yeah, there's quite a few slides here. Thanks for the introduction, Dave. One thing I'll reiterate what Dave said is, people ask me this all the time, and whenever I'm out speaking, I try to make a point of this. I think one of the most misunderstood things about Platte River is that four cities formed us and that you own us. And for years at Platte River, we were kind of out of sight, out of mind, building resources, doing things, cities, customers. And then about 10 years ago, cities started getting asked questions, about generation and renewables and things like that. And so we've had to beef up communications, marketing. We've got a whole new division at Platte River. So with me tonight is Raj Singh Massetti. Very pleased to have him on board. He's our new Chief Transition and Integration Officer. He hates his title. I told him I'd come up with a better one at a later date, but at least it describes what he's doing. He's got IT, he's got OT, he's got all the modeling. He's going to go into a little bit of detail tonight. And then Eddie Gutierrez is our newest addition, Chief Strategy Officer, still in transition, getting the rest of his household here. But you're going to be seeing a lot more of him from a communications and marketing perspective. So he'll come up later on and kind of close out the presentation. I thought it'd be good to kind of ground everybody on how we got to where we're at now. And then I'll kind of turn it over to Raj and let him really kind of focus on how we're going to make this transition, and then again let Eddie finish. But when you all formed Platte River, you all had federal hydro allocations from the government. And so that 90 megawatts of hydro was the summation of all four communities, and your peak load at that time was about 100 megawatts between the 4 years. So immediately when the organization was formed, we were kind of under duress. We need to go out. We were buying in the market. We needed to start building resources. The government said, hey, we're not building any more dams. You guys are on your own. Your cities are going to grow. And so the first thing we did was we went out and started building baseload resources, because back then, not to get too technical, but the cities were all winter peaking utilities, a lot higher load factors, pretty steady load. Wasn't a lot of air conditioning like there is now, so we didn't see that really peaky loads that we see now in the summer months. We are one of 5 owners of 2 of the 3 coal units over at the Craig Station. Unit 1 is scheduled to be shut down by the end of 25. Unit 2, September of 28. We built the Ride Energy Station. We own and operate that ourselves, and there's additional gas up there too. But that coal unit, by the time we got to 1984, we had about twice the amount of energy that we needed to serve city load. And so a lot of those sales went to Excel Energy. Those of you who've been around here for a long time might recall that there was a nuclear unit at Fort St. Vrain that just never could quite run. And so Excel was actually short resources. And so we built Rawhide knowing we would grow into it, and then had a 20-year contract. So every year we reclaimed part of that contract and grew our way into it between 1984 and 2004. We're the first utility. You were all the first utility in the state to provide wind in the form of Medicine Bow, 6 megawatts. That still serves you today. We no longer own it. Those turbines got quite old, and there was an opportunity for an organization to come in and kind of refurbish those turbines, and we entered into a purchase power agreement with them for fixed pricing for another 15 years, so that's still in our portfolio. And then I alluded to this earlier, but when we got to the late 90s, early 2000s, a lot of air conditioning penetration, and we saw a different kind of load than we'd never seen before, and it was peaking load. And so, not to steal much of Raj's thunder, but the most economical way to meet peaking load is with gas turbines, because they're relatively inexpensive assets to put in, but they're relatively expensive to run. Fortunately, they don't run that often. They come on in the afternoon, they shut off in the evening. In fact, if you were to look at the data that I look at as a CEO, I looked this morning in preparation for coming down here. Year to date combined, they've run at a 3% capacity factor, and that's extremely high for our system. We've had other utilities in the region are short. To serve our own load, they run about 1% of the time. So we had our base load, then we had our peaking resources, and then we started to add more renewables. Silver Sage, which if you go to Cheyenne, take a left, go about 5 miles, Silver Sage site's up there, 12 megawatts. Most expensive renewable resource we have on our system was Silver Sage. Then we added Spring Canyon at about half the cost. There's kind of a theme here. We were kind of dollar cost averaging our way into renewables. As they were starting to come down, we were increasing the volume to keep, the rate pressure down. In 2016, we've got about 4,500 acres up at Wright, so we have plenty of land. We put 30 megawatts of solar up there. That spans over about 150 acres of our ground. That represents about 1.5% of the community load. Dave alluded to your 800,000 to 900,000 megawatt hours. Combined, all four cities between 3.2, 3.3 million megawatt hours. And that first slide, if you looked at it close, we'll supply about 5 million this year. So what's the difference between those two? That's being sold into the surplus market, because we don't operate in a vacuum by ourselves. We're interconnected with Black Hills. We're interconnected with Colorado Springs Utilities. We're interconnected with Xcel Energy. We're interconnected with Tri-State. And so we're all constantly managing power with each other. And when other units are off, we're selling them power and vice versa. You'll see in some slides later on where we actually make purchases. So we added Rawhide Flats. And then something significant was a joint dispatch agreement. We got together with the Colorado utilities and thought, hey, we're trading power with each other anyway. Why don't we create our own little mini market, and everybody put in their cost model profile, and then whoever needs energy can get the next least cost resource. And so we've been involved in that. It was Colorado Springs, Platte River, Black Hills, and Xcel. Tri-State chose not to participate, and Colorado Springs has since pulled out. But the three of us, and it served us very well. Our average cost of energy last year was 1 cent a kilowatt. Now, I will tell you that we're buying a lot of our energy in the middle of the night when there's a lot of wind on the system, not just ours. And so rather than curtail that or dump that or sell that at a loss, it's getting dispatched under joint dispatch between a half a cent and a cent a kilowatt, or I like to talk in dollars per megawatt hour, so $5 to $10 a megawatt hour. That's significant because we buy quite a bit of energy there, and it enables us to either save fuel cost on a resource or saves us from starting another resource if we can bridge that gap. And you'll see a theme in that when Raj talks about the intermittency of renewables and how we're going to manage that. In 2018, I'd been the CEO for a couple of years, and we'd been talking to the board, and we all felt like it was important because boards change. Mayors turnover, utility directors turnover. We were in a significant transition as an organization, and so the board really wanted to lay the foundation for future boards to understand why we had taken a major shift in direction. And they did that in the form of resource diversification policy. And we'll get into that here in a little bit. But basically what it said was, Jason, you as the CEO, proactively work towards a non-carbon energy future without sacrificing the three pillars of this organization that have served it well: reliability, affordability, and environmental sustainability. We want you to maintain those things. In no way, shape, or form sacrifice those. Now, I'm the first one to tell you that we do a pretty good job of defining reliability. Affordability, I think, is a collaborative effort between us and the owner communities. We talk about rates a little bit tonight. And I think decarbonizing our resource portfolio speaks volumes to the commitment to environmental responsibility. So that was passed at the end of 2018. The next big resource, the most significant, everything else that I've talked about to date pales in comparison, but we added 225 megawatts of wind about 15 miles north of Rawhide, just over the Wyoming border. just that one resource can serve the whole town of Longmont for a year. Now, not when you need the energy, but in aggregate, it produces about 900,000 megawatt hours of wind energy. It runs at about a 43-44% capacity factor. But think spring, fall, night, that's when you get more of your wind penetration. We would like it to be on hot, sunny days, but that's typically not how it occurs. But that was a large part, 28% of total community load with that project. We actually, the original project was contemplated at 150 megawatts, and we were able to resell some other wind that we had at cost to make room for this lower cost wind. It's less than 2 cents a kilowatt, and get it on our system while prices were really low. We'll talk a little bit about what's taken place in the market as things have started to go against us, and hopefully they're going to start coming back with the previous speaker, the Inflation Reduction Act. I think there's some good things that we're looking forward to help the price of renewables. We added another 22 megawatts of solar up at Rawhide. This time we put a 2 megawatt battery with it. We talked to the board, hey, we want to get used to charging and discharging this battery, see how it works on our system before we go out and buy 10, 20, 30 megawatts. In general, a battery is about $1 million a megawatt. In general, prices are starting to come down, but that's about what it is. So that gives you 2 megawatts over 24 hours. For $1 million, purchase PPA contract for that commodity. Then we are entering into, I say then, next spring we're going to move into the Southwest Power Pool, which is going to be critical for us, the energy imbalance service market. So that'll be the next step from joint dispatch, where we're trading on like a 14 straight region with other folks. So broader geographic footprint, better opportunity to market renewables and purchase renewables through that contractual arrangement. We ultimately think by 24 or 5 we'll be in a full-blown market. That's what's represented entry into the Southwest RTO West, kind of a fancy word, but that would be a full organized market, which Raj will talk about in a little bit. We've been delayed. Our Black Hollow Solar, which will be our largest solar project to date, we had a written contract on that. The pandemic hit, then inflation started to hit, and the counterparty walked in and basically said, hey, we'd rather pay you liquidated damages than honor this contract, because if we do, we're going to lose $100 million. We said, okay. We'd been out in the market for refreshed RFP prices. We said, refresh your RFP because we really don't want the liquidated damages. We want the non-carbon energy. Give us a price. And so we're still working through reconciling that with them. But I will tell you, this is a theme. It's not all good news up here tonight from a cost perspective. From that original contract that was confidential, their price to us more than doubled. That's how significant it was. And we're talking about liquidated damages well in excess of $10 million that they'd rather just cut us a check and walk away from their losses. Like, whoa, we've done a lot of work. We've got permitting. We've got a site. We've got a design for a substation to interconnect on our system. Let's not walk away from it. Let's see if we can come up with a deal that works for both parties. So we're still working through that. They've indicated to us a price that we're willing to accept, but we're still, the contract is, I have not signed it yet because there's still some back and forth between the attorneys to make sure that we get everything locked down, because we don't want this to happen to us again, because time isn't really our friend as we're trying to make this transition. They already cost us a year with this whole thing. Now, in a little bit of their defense, I don't think anybody contemplated what was going to happen as a result of, the pandemic, and nobody predicted inflation like this and tariffs that have since been reconciled. But I can tell you stories of solar panels that were stuck on ships that people weren't wanting to deliver into ports because they didn't know what they were going to get charged for them from a tariff perspective. A lot of those things have since been reconciled. So that takes us through 2025. If you take a step back and say, where are we now from a system perspective? You see the pie chart on the left. From a budgeted perspective that Dave told you, we had a $280 million budget this year. If we're right, and we're never right 100% on our budget or resource performance, but we're usually not too far off, we projected that 36.3% of the resources to serve all of this, not just your cities, but all 5 million megawatt hours, was going to come from non-carbon energy. So far, year to date, it's at 40%. I don't know what radio stations people listen to or where they get their news from. One of the windiest years on record, one of the sunniest years on record, one of the hottest years on record. Been very good. We have overproduced almost every month through halfway through the year on renewable energy. So you can see it reflected in the chart, about almost 25% wind up there, and you can see solar production, although it looks very small, is going to grow quite a bit as we get some of these bigger projects. Compare and contrast that to 2030, our projected system total of about 88.4%. You could plus or minus a few percent on that, because the way we incrementally add renewables is we're going to take advantage based upon price, and we may add more or less in the next project. But Raj will come up here and tell you that we need to add 400 megawatts of solar and about 400 more megawatts of wind and a couple hundred megawatts of battery storage and some additional dispatchable resources to manage all that with. So that's what that chart represents. I think it's important as a council that you understand we're sitting here in 2022, and I'm trying to tell you what it's going to be in 2030 when I just got done telling you how crazy this whole world has been over the last 2 years. So me predicting what prices are going to be going forward, when we're going to get permits, we would have probably the thing that we missed the most was the opposition against us to try to get a lot of these projects permitted. We were stunned at the pushback that we got from county commissioners not wanting them in their counties. And so much so that this most recent project, a town went and annexed the property so that the project could go forward and put it under their own authority, because they're like, hey, we're fine with it here. I think it'll be a good tax benefit for our citizens, but that's the kind of stuff we're up against. A year goes by having discussions with commissioners who ultimately vote and go, we're not going to support it. And that's not just us. That's happening all over. All over. It's something that we incorrectly thought, well, gee, this will be a perfect complement to some other things that are already going on in the county and give you more diversified source of revenue, but we were wrong about that. The diversification policy I've referenced a little bit. I'm almost done, and I'll turn it over to Raj. The purpose was to provide guidance for resource planning, portfolio diversification, and carbon reduction. I won't read the goal to you. I know I said it pretty close, but not word for word, but the points are up there. The important point on the right side of the slide, I know there's a lot of words on there. So the first part, the first bullet, we got a check mark by. We are moving into a market. That's not a question. It's going to happen. We're going to the imbalanced market. And just so you know, okay, Jason, what does that mean? You're sitting there telling me you're moving in a market. Millions of dollars of infrastructure, computers, software, staffing, data scientists. It's a whole new area that we've never been in before at Platte River. And so we're really ramping up in preparation because it's a much more transactional utility. Think of it kind of like a stock market and you not wanting to be on the wrong side of a transaction, because you can lose millions of dollars very quickly if you're not competent, you don't have the right data to make good business decisions. Everything that's in yellow up there, Raj is really going to speak to, but these were all caveats that the board contemplated were going to be challenges for us as we made this transition. And so you can see things about there needs to be continued investment in transmission and distribution infrastructure, distribution being on your side of the system, transition being on our side of the system. We take it to the substation. Dave and Daryl take it from there down to businesses and homes. There has to be new communication structure. There has to be two-way communication. There's a lot of stuff in there that Raj can speak to better than I can. And then finally in blue, battery storage. And we're cautiously optimistic. I don't think battery storage cost and technology have advanced as much as people thought they were a couple of years ago. There's been some setbacks with some fires on some large lithium-ion batteries out west, things like that. But what we're starting to look at is there's a lot of promise out there with some startup companies on long-duration storage. That's a much safer technology. Really, basically, all you need is land and water to make these batteries work. And where a traditional lithium-ion battery you can discharge for 2 hours or 4 hours, there's startups out there doing 10-hour discharge, and there's others. Raj and I went out and visited Cal Berkeley, 100-hour discharge battery. Game changer for us. If we can, because a lithium-ion battery is just going to shift load throughout a day. We get a snowstorm, no sun, for 4 or 5 days over the course of winter. We've got to serve your load from somewhere. If we're not getting it from renewables, we have to have storage already charged and ready to deploy over that period of time. We do model run after model run after model run to make sure that the reliability that you've enjoyed for 49 years, next year is our 50th celebration at Platte River, that's not being sacrificed as we move forward. So Rajan will get into a little bit more about that when he talks. Let me talk a little bit, because I don't want to lay this off on my staff. I'm your CEO. I'm accountable. We've talked to the board. Our recommendation is a 5% rate increase. Back in 2020, when we did high-level estimates of what it would cost between now and 2030 to make this transition, we estimated it would be 3.2% a year. I can tell you since that time, I can't think of much that's gone our way. Inflation's gone up. Commodity costs have gone up. Labor costs have gone up. Yesterday, things started to go our way. But back then, we were criticized for the price that we were estimating we were going to pay for wind and solar in the future. Turned out that those estimates back in 2020 were 50% too low based upon what we're seeing now. Now, we're hopeful. We've asked all of our vendors that we have bids from. They said, give us 2 weeks, we'll refresh the bids as a reduction of the Inflation Reduction Act coming through. Let us run that through our models. And so we're going to know within the next 2 weeks what it means to the price of our next solar project. We're going to know what it means to the price of our next wind project. And I think one of the most significant things that may get missed by people that aren't in the business is, for the first time ever, we're going to be able to charge a battery from any source, and it's still going to be able to take advantage of a tax credit. That was something that I've argued against for 6 or 7 years. Why does it have to be limited to be charged by solar? Why does it have to be limited to be charged? If you really want advancement of renewables, let us use it to manage the entire system. And so folks in Washington agreed that's also in there. So that's a game changer for us. That's going to put us on a level playing field as we go to procure storage. But what you're looking at up here, there are 5 categories. If you take the 4 on the right, and trust me, because I'm good at math, they kind of wash each other out. You've got operations and maintenance costs. Right now, this year's budget, the $280 million budget, and our projected 2032 budget. Why 2032 when the RDP is only 20? We always take a 10-year look in our strategic financial plan and budget, so we're always giving the board a 10-year look ahead. So that's the only reason it's 2032. Snapshot, right now actual, projection for 2032, what's the difference? You see O&M go down a little bit. You see A&G costs go up, more software, more hardware, more staff. You see DER spending go up, no surprise, and then there's a lot of portions of that, debt, capital, things like that in there. But they wash each other out, and what's driving the rate is a little over $100 million of cost right now for all the energy that we deliver to your system and sell into the market. Our projection for that same energy 10 years from now doubles. And we're accelerating at putting in those resources. And so in order to grow into that rate, right, what we thought was 3.2 is now 5 for the next several years. We're hopeful that maybe it will come down, but at least we have gotten a commitment from the board, because Dave and his team and the other cities need to put together their own budgets for you to approve. And in order to do that, they got to know what their wholesale cost is from us. And so we've agreed to live with 5. We do modeling every couple months. There's always portions of that that are changing, but we feel fairly confident with that recommendation. It's on this slide. The original, it started around 6.8, but we have looked at some ways that we can drop that back down to 5. And we'll need a vote from the board, Platte River Board, to approve a revenue deferral policy. I don't want to take anybody through the boring accounting world, but we're going to defer expenses and revenues, because as we grow into that rate, we project to have some fairly good years here over the next couple of years until some significant expenditures come up. So we'll take some of those gains right now, and then we will show those on the books in future years when we have rate pressure. It's a common practice in an industry like ours where we don't add cost incrementally every year on an equal basis. We tend to have one big expense and then live with it for 5-6 years as the city grows into the next resource. And so the accounting worlds recognize the ability to do that. The average wholesale rate, this is blended. It depends on, your peak for the year and everything else. But from a budget perspective, this year, $64.63 a megawatt hour, or 6.463 cents a kilowatt, however you want to say it, going to 67.86. That shows the 5% change. Before I turn it over to Raj, I went through a lot of stuff, tried to go quick. There's a lot of information up there. Some of you are going, geez, sit down, for the love of God, let the other guy talk. But I wanted to make sure that I got you kind of framed as to how we got to where we are now. Things haven't really gone our way. We're still moving forward. We're still committed to doing everything we can to reach our goals, but it's not any easier. It hasn't gotten any easier, but hopefully we're going to see a little bit of relief in the form of PPA pricing here over the next couple of weeks.
Thank you, Jason. Do we have any comments from councilors? Councilor Waters.
Thanks, Mayor Pike. It's really not a question. It's just maybe to reinforce that last slide that we should be anticipating, as should our customers in Longmont, a 40% increase over a 10-year period of time.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I'm trying to project everything.
I got it.
Now.
I got it.
Yeah.
There's a whole bunch of variables.
Yes.
Kind of like from the last 10 years.
Yes.
Things you didn't know.
Yep.
A lot of in the context of a bunch of unknowns.
Yeah.
Future pandemics,
Yeah.
supply chains,
Correct.
labor costs.
Correct.
Tariffs or whatever. Today, the projection is a 40% increase, and I think, we will hear we're going to get as we go through budgets,
Sure.
we'll hear from David and Harold whether it's the 5% or 5% plus or minus in 2023. We're going to get feedback from our residents, and we'll hear it in terms of, in spite of what the cost is in comparison to other municipalities. People will tell us, yeah, but I don't live in that municipality. I live here.
Right.
I just think people need to understand when there's a cost that's gone up, it's because of the cost of the wholesale cost, and the production of that energy requires X. That gets translated to ratepayers like us, right, that are building a budget and have to make certain we keep our supplier in business, and that's going to be on the backs of everybody in the community.
Correct.
Yeah.
A couple of things I would just say. I think you make a great point. In general, rule of thumb, that 40% that you see, we're about 2/3 of your cost, right? So if you did the math on that, you're going to see straight through from wholesale to retail, that'll impact you about 31% or so, right? That doesn't mean that Dave and Daryl and his team don't have AMI, other things
Sure.
that they need to put
We
in,
do.
infrastructure on their side as well. But in general, it's a little bit different in every city. It's a little bit less in Estes because they're a winter peaking utility. But the Front Range utilities, Fort Collins, Longmont, Loveland, we're about 2/3 of the total cost.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. And then one more thing, since you brought it up, I also think it's important to know this stops at 10 years. When we kind of grow into this resource portfolio, what we project going forward is very little rate pressure at this point in time, because you've added all the resources under fixed PPA agreements, right? To the extent I'm a good manager and I put together a good team, we manage other controllable costs. This is two things. It's putting them in quicker than planned and costs going against us while we do it. So to get through that period of time, we've got to accelerate and grow into that. But once we get through it, we actually project that, let's say we did none of this. We've run scenarios. Let's say we never did any of this. We just kept running coal plants and, we added things when they were financially advantageous. We projected that by 2040, we'd be at the same place. Difference is, with this plan, no carbon. Right? So Eddie and his team are going to work with your staffs and talk about, okay, full transparency, we're asking you to pay for more. What are you getting for that? Right? Because I think there's a great story to tell as to why we're making this transition, why it should matter to people, and what they're paying for.
Councilor Martin.
Thank you, Mayor Peck. Just in terms of the history, can you describe the role of the four cities in driving the resource diversification policy to be adopted?
I think that, I'm not sure where you're going with it, Councilor Martin, but I think that four cities that own Platte River all had kind of different opinions on where the organization should go. And probably 10, 12 years ago, there were a lot of discussions about well, maybe Platte River should start building customized portfolios to match each owner community. It was about that time that I came in and I said, whoa, wait, time out. Like, you form this organization to take advantage of economies of scale. You have four owners. That requires compromise. Let's talk about where the cities want to grow together, right, and what their goals are combined. And that really led to 14, 15 really earnest conversations about, hey, let's try to decarbonize this portfolio. Ultimately, it was memorialized in 2018. But I mean, look, we're here. We exist to provide value to the owner communities. The communities say they want to decarbonize. It's our job to figure out a way to do it. So my easy answer to your question is we wouldn't be here without the four cities driving this organization to carry out this mission.
So you don't think that the 2030 goals adopted by all four cities in 2018/19 had much to do with it? You think you'd have been there anyway?
No, I said the exact opposite.
Did you?
Yeah, I said, but for the four cities changing course.
Ah, I see.
Yeah, we wouldn't be going down this road.
Okay.
I don't believe. No, because I think up until then, the best evidence as I can offer is I don't think anybody's been to more Platte River board meetings than me by proxy of my job. I've been a senior manager there for a long time, probably 24 years. First 15 of those, low cost reliability. That's all we care about. And I'm not minimizing that, but low cost reliability. They're our customers. Let us deal with them. We don't care what resources you have. Just keep the cost low. This is completely different than that.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
I was just going to add to it because some of these questions also transpired directly to the City of Longmont, to LPC. And so I'll touch on Councilmember Martin's too. So, Councilmember Martin, I appreciate what you pulled forward and some of the information that you actually had in your council packet documented really the many steps that this council and previous councils have taken that have rolled into the diversification policy, including the 100% renewable goal by 2030. And then we've also had the Climate Action Task Force and a lot of other things that have happened and are currently happening. We're going to talk about beneficial electrification here in the coming month also. There's a lot of things being driven at this council seat that work here at home as well as broader at Platte River. And then also, Councilmember Waters, to your question about that. So we were, based on Platte River's previous estimates, we were anticipating a 3.2% approximate average. So this would be an increase from what was earlier projected. And I think as Jason was alluding to, and you'll see in the rest of it, it's being driven by your essentially rebuilding a complete electric system, changing from what you currently use for assets to generate energy to a much different. And we're accelerating that, so a lot of these assets are online earlier so that you have a time to operate them and make sure they all work. But since some of these things were sort of in the LPC wheelhouse, I just wanted to add that part to it.
Thank you. Sure. Councilor Waters.
Thanks, Mayor Peck, and thanks, David. As I'm listening, and I should have probably asked this question of Jason when he was at the mic, and maybe we get this from the next two speakers. But to circle back to what we heard from Seth, and I'm certain there's a ton of detail that's yet to be learned about the bill that was signed yesterday, or I guess today, by the president, and where that might show up in either deferring costs or covering costs, or has that all been factored into what these projections are? How will the four cities and the ratepayers benefit potentially, or the utility be able to capitalize on that $370 billion that's going to be available?
Yeah, so to your first question, and I'll let Dave answer the second one, nothing from the Inflation Reduction Act has in this information. What I alluded to earlier is we have two projects slated, right, to move forward, two different solar projects. So we've asked the finalists to go back as a result of this being signed. So we'll know exactly their view on what kind of relief this gives, at least as it relates to wholesale solar prices and storage prices.
And does some of that potentially show up in your estimates or your forecasting Or have you already baked that in? To some
No,
assumptions?
we did not assume that that would happen going forward.
So that might show something might change then.
That's what I
going
was
forward.
alluding to.
Yeah,
We
yeah,
may get some relief
Gotcha.
in subsequent
All right.
years depending upon how it plays out.
Yeah. And David, anything to add to that?
I don't have anything real specific other than it is a game changer.
Yeah.
Because it provides some more flexibility, eliminates some barriers, and frankly, in some ways, being a municipality and having an organization that works for municipality meant that there were certain things not available to us that were available to the private sector. And so I think this will change quite a bit, and we'll see it for the next several years.
Yeah, thanks.
So I did have a question. No, that's okay, Raj. Jason, did you want to make a comment? to
Oh, no.
that? Oh,
I'm
okay.
just trying to figure out when to get out of here, Christine.
No. So in the next presentation, or perhaps someone will cover it, I want to know, as the cities start selling their own power generated from renewable energy, how does that work since you're going out to the market now, buying renewable energy and project to do that in the future? How does it work when individual cities are producing their own energy and selling it to PRPA?
So if it's all right with you, Mayor Peck, why don't we circle back to that question after Raj has made the rest of the presentations, because I think
Perfect.
it will
Okay.
give us more foundation to talk off of, okay?
That'd be great.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Thank you.
Raj, you've been introduced 5 times. You're up.
Yeah. And it's always tough to follow someone who's really tall. Okay. Jason talked about a lot of uncertainties and cost is not known. What's the future going to look like? But one of the engineering principles is planning. We plan everything. Engineers know everything. And that's part of what this integrated resource planning is. We try to plan everything, and we work with the city staff in developing a plan that is the future and which is based on the 3 pillars that Jason mentioned: reliability, affordability, and environmental sustainable. And this is also to make sure the board-approved resource diversification plan is implemented as part of this integrated resource plan. So IRP is like a blueprint that we create. And once we have the blueprint, it is not something that we start working on it. It's a continuous process. And the next IRP is going to happen in 2024. It's going to go through the same process where the city staff is going to work with the Platte River. The community stakeholder meetings are going to be conducted. The feedback is taken. And all that is put into a model, an integrated resource plan. We run through tons of scenarios. We do reliability studies. We also look at what our future looks like, and we look at costs. All of that is made through. It is a long process. Just the model runs takes about 2-3 days to just run. And then in the middle, if it fails, we have to go back and run it again. So it's a long process. But why do we do this? IRP is a strategic plan for the future. It's the guiding post. We look at the plan, we go with it. We also need that for the clean energy plan. How is the clean energy plan matching with how we are adding resources to the portfolio? And finally, when it all started, integrated resource planning was a requirement by the Western Area Power Administration. They wanted to understand what's our load, what kind of resources we are getting, so that they can do the hydro allocation. That was kind of the basis for all this integrated resource plan. It has obviously evolved into something new now, which is the guiding principle for the new resources that we are adding, specifically new resource, meaning the clean energy resources that we are adding to the portfolio. So we did the last IRP in 2020. And then we refer to this thing called RP22. And again, engineers like code words. RP22 is nothing but a refresh to the integrated resource plan of 2020 with the new facts. Facts meaning we said, how can everything come online on January 1st, 2030? Obviously, the models do what's good at it. It's saying, the costs are going to be least if we push everything to the end. And then once that happens, obviously the model said turn it on in January 1st, 2030. But then we said that is not realistic, so we looked at Resource Plan 2022, and we accelerated the renewable integration. The blue line that you see is that accelerated. We are bringing on renewable resources sooner than we had planned in our initial plan. And that is what does that do is we are able to actually reduce the carbon emission 5.5% more than what we had initially planned. Also, we are also going to see all this integration going to happen by 2028. By January 1st, 2028, all these renewable resources are going to be in the portfolio. This gives us that 2 years to actually work with our renewable resources, work with our existing dispatchable resources. It is another engineering thing where, we plan for everything, but there can always be something that we missed. This will give us that planning requirement to do 2 years of managing the portfolio. And then one key thing that is happening, we have all heard we are shutting down the coal plant by 2030. And today that coal plant produces about 2.4 million megawatt hours. And that translates to 3 different colors. The green is solar, which is about 999,000 megawatt hours. And what that is about 41% of that resource is being replaced with solar. 44% is being replaced with wind. And the blue line that's there. Now, when you add this green bar and blue bar, which is intermittent, and is a function of the weather, we need something to manage the system reliability. And that dispatchability is coming from that blue that's on the top. The idea of that dispatchable resources is to maintain the system reliability. And the question that you would say is, we talked about storage, how come storage is not replacing? The reason storage is not showing up in the bar chart, stacked bar chart, is because storage is not really producing energy. It is just shifting the time. You charge 1 hour and then you discharge another hour. So it's not really producing new energy, but shifting the time, which is very important, which adds more control, dispatchability to the system. So we are going from 2.4 gigawatt hours to just 357 gigawatt hours of dispatchable resources in the new plan. Again, I'm sorry, it's 2,412 gigawatt hours. Now, this is a chart from a recent past, August 6th. It is a chart, it looks like wiggly chart, but the idea here is to show a few things. The black line is the demand the Platte River served on August 6th. Throughout the day, it goes up, down, and then comes back to normal. It's kind of the shape which we serve the load. And if you look at the resources, the bottom is the hydro that we get from hydro allocation. That's at the bottom. And then the green is the wind. If you can see the wind, it is coming in the morning, and then when we really need in the afternoon, it's not there. And then again, in the evening, it picks up. So there is this, what is called a variability in that renewable resources. And then on top of the green is that yellow, which is the solar that comes during sun. And when sun's gone, you lose it. And on that particular day, we even lost solar energy around 3 p.m. The blue thing that you see is all the coal resources. And today we are going to talk about how are we going to replace all that blue coal with the clean energy. The green has to go up, the yellow has to go up, and the red, which is there, which has today supported the grid from dispatchability. When solar dropped, wind dropped, we were able to use the dispatchable resources that were in the system to provide energy and maintain the requirement of load. So that's what's happening. And you can say, okay, Raj, why don't we replace blue with one color, let's say wind. But the thing is, even if we were to quadruple how much wind during that morning, we still would need some more energy. So this brings the concept of what's portfolio fit. One resource cannot solve all our problems. One color cannot replace one blue color. So it's a combination of wind, solar, storage, dispatchable capacity that is needed to maintain and support the grid and serve the load. So I'm going to this is like I would say at a high level how the grid is served, how Platte River looks at serving the load. Now if I translate this to a house, and I didn't pick everything that's in a house, it's a small house where we have LED, refrigerator, and AC, and there is a residential solar in it. And if you look at the shape, the refrigerator is running all 24 hours, and in the morning, as soon as we get up, we turn on the LED lamps, which is the blue triangle in the morning, and then as the day goes, we turn on the AC load picks up, and then in the evening when we come back, we crank up the AC again, and we also turn on the LEDs. Now, if you look at the shape of your solar energy, it is a perfect shape, which is between 6 and evening 7. But that shape really doesn't match with the energy demand of your house. Meaning, in the morning it's not available in the evening, and throughout the day when it's available, you don't have as much load. Meaning you produce more than what you need. So that is a good example. But how would you solve this? The one way to solve is to shift the hours with storage. That would be a logical way to do it, and I agree with that. So the next slide, you have solar plus the storage. You were able to charge your solar with the storage. You charge the storage with the solar energy, and you discharge the storage when you needed it in the morning and in the evening. But the key is, even in the evening, which we could refer to evening peak or evening ramp, you did not have enough storage to cover your load. You are still dependent on your local utility to provide you the energy that you need. And throughout the day when you're producing more solar energy, the dark orange line actually represents the solar energy can be used to charge your battery. So given all that, you can say, Raju, why can't we resize it? We can make it. Yes, it's all coming down to the costs. What is the right sizing? What is the reliability needed? What does the utility have to do to support you when you are pushing energy to the grid, as well as consuming energy from the grid? This is a way. It is not energy efficiency. It is not where the load is lost. The load is still there. Load meaning the demand for the electricity is still there. Your residential solar has to match what we need, as well as what that really translates is we need the data from the customers. The data needs to come to us so that we can account for that information and make a good planning called load forecasting and make sure that enough resources are available to support that. So that is the idea of combination of solar and storage. So the next thing, again, I'm trying to say, yeah, we have the storage, we have the solar, great, that can solve the problem. But we live in northern Colorado, we also get snow. We have what's called dark calm, where there are days when we don't have solar energy. When we don't have solar energy for 5 days, how do you charge your battery? So we kind of did some simulations on dark calm in our resource planning. We looked at what would it take if we were to completely rely on battery and solar to serve your load. So day one, it's great. We started with 3 batteries. We said we can serve it, great. But by midnight, we have 2 batteries that we couldn't charge anymore. And the next day, we had to bring on another 2 batteries to serve from midnight to the morning. So by day 2, we needed about 5 batteries to serve the load. And then the bigger problem, if there is a dark calm, meaning we don't have sun for a couple of days, 5 days to be precise, we have an issue. We have reliability issue that we have to manage. Again, these are some of the problems that we are, as an engineering problems, we are trying to deal to make sure we have the right kind of resources to support the grid. And then, like Jason said, we went to Berkeley, looked at long-duration storage technology, which is 100 hours of discharge. We are looking at 16 hours of storage. We're looking at all possible combinations that can support these problems. So we like solar, we like carbon-free energy, but we have to make sure reliability is maintained so that our customers get electricity all the time. So those are some of the challenges that we're dealing, and we're trying to solve the problems with industry, and we're constantly looking at new solutions for that. Now coming to the resource diversification plan, a timeline. The big thing that's happening from 2024 to 2028 is 2024, we'll have a new integrated resource plan, which is 2024, and we are going to be adding 300 megawatts of solar in the grid. Platte River is going to have 300 megawatts. So what that translates to is about approximately 50,000 residential homes. On behalf of 50,000 residential homes, you have 300 megawatts of solar. We are going to add 200 megawatts of wind on behalf of 30,000 homes. Different time of the day. It's not adding, but it is available different time of the day. And then we are adding 200 megawatts of energy storage to maintain the dispatchability needs of the system. We are also adding another 166 megawatts of reciprocating engines, which are quick start. What really the problem that we are trying to solve? Previously, Jason talked about peak load, and when the load went, it suddenly spiked, we turned on the peakers. But we have a new problem. We have flexible generation. We have flexible demand. Flexible generation meaning variable generation, and demand which is flexible. We could have electric vehicles. We talked about Inflation Reduction Act, great for electric vehicles, electric load. So we start seeing this flexibility in the system, and to support that, we need to have what is called dispatchability. On top of that, we are also going to be building a 100 megawatt virtual power plant. You may say, what's virtual power plant? I'm going to talk about that, but the idea is the virtual power plant, the future of energy, electricity industry, all the consumers in future are going to be the producers as well. So they're prosumers. So we have to talk about how they use the residential solar, distribution generation, beneficial electric load, and even electric vehicles. Again, data. All that needs to come in to develop that virtual power plant. And we're going to build 100 megawatt virtual power plant by 2028. That's our target. So at the bottom, you see the retirements that Jason already talked about. And the big thing is, by 2030, we're going to get back our 60 megawatts of the wind resource that we had sent out of the system. And the Raha is going to retire by 2030. Before I talk about virtual power plant, Jason talked about organized market. It's very important to understand, Jason did mention stock market, the risk and the volatility in the market. Organized market for electricity market, specifically also referred as independent system operator or regional transmission operator, ISOs and RTOs. ISOs and RTOs, Platte River will become a market participant of an ISO RTO. What does an ISO RTO do? It allows economic dispatch of all the resources that are in that market. The power markets will allow all the utilities to show up all their load that they have, the demand that they have, and also are required to show the capacity that they have to carry. And once an ISO, ISO is a big software to begin with. They run these economic dispatch models to make sure the load is served at the least cost. Their objective is to serve the load at a minimum cost. And that's what's happening. It also allows us to monetize the virtual power plant, a virtual power plant that will be built based on the information and the data that is given to Platte River by the cities and the customers of those cities. And all this comes with a challenge. Jason talked about volatility, risk, cost of integration, because these requires systems, infrastructure, and integration with the markets, integration with the cities, and the AMI data to actually develop and monetize virtual power plants in these markets. Jason also covered that we are joining an imbalanced market next year, and we will be joining a full-fledged day 2 RTO market in 2025. So imbalance market is on a high level. Whenever you are short or you have less energy, you can go to the market and pick it up. And in a day two market, which is a full-fledged market, in the day ahead, you tell the market what is your demand or load. And you also tell them what resources do you have. And the market takes all the participants of that market and identifies the least cost to serve your load. That's happening. But the key is all load-serving entities have to come to the market with capacity. You cannot just go to the market saying that I'm just going to buy. You have to come there with resources that are required to serve the load. Now, this is actually probably was a very happy slide because of President Biden signed the bill, because this will be actually accelerated with that Inflation Reduction Act. Because everything that you see there is a lot with building electrification, heat pumps, electric vehicles is another piece, all that information, distributed generation, investment tax credit, production tax credit for other smaller utilities as well, and the demand response linked to energy efficiency. If you looked at that virtual power plant, and power plants typically need fuel, this virtual power plant, the fuel for this is data. Data is the one that fuels this power plant. You tell what is needed, what is available, and we take that information and identify what is available by each city, and then we take that information and offer that information to the market. So there are two levels. First, city has control of all these distributed generation, electrification information, and then whatever excess is available, we can take that and go to the market and monetize it. So the customers ultimately benefit from forming the virtual power plant and taking advantage of what's needed in the market. If some other participant in the grid needs it, your virtual power plant can also support that. So that's the whole idea. And finally, I talked about all these things that are happening. These are great. So the two things, and Jason mentioned that I didn't like my title because it basically looks like what I do, which is what it should reflect. But integration is digital transformation. We live in the world where data is the key, and we at Platte River and at our members, there is a lot that needs to happen. We are merging operation technology, information technology, and bringing data science. Data science is going to be the future. To be very precise on data science, we are looking at artificial intelligence, machine learning, performance indicators. Why is all that important? Because the producers are also the consumers. We need to know how did they perform, how much did they perform, so that we can use that to forecast, identify the trends and patterns, identify what customers will do in terms of performance. Will they perform when the system needs them, so that we can count their capacity as something that is confirmed. All that information comes to this big information technology, gets all this data that needs to be processed. On the transition side, all the cities, including Longmont, there are a lot of things that have to happen in terms of policies, the rates, and the energy solution, customer solution, AMI data, all of that, the smart grid program that's being done, all of that will fuel the virtual power plant that we are building. And this virtual power plant will allow us to participate in the markets, which I talked about. And again, it not only serves just the load that is Longmont's load, but the system as such helps everyone with this. And then finally, we have other assets. We have new resources, wind, solar. We have to do a lot of resource planning, a lot of planning to get this virtual power plant with other physical assets, bring it together, and get into the market so that we serve our load at the least cost and make sure we are managing the risks around that, the volatility, and make sure the key goal is how do we make sure that by 2030 we have that 100% carbon-free goal we maintain. So the virtual power plant is the last mile. We can do these things, but without the support of the communities, to get to that last mile, it is the data, information, working collaborative with the staff, all of that is needed to get to the end point. And Eddie will talk more about what is needed, how can we communicate, and how do we work together. That is my last slide. I know I covered a lot of things, so I'm going to take questions, or if I think I made everyone sleep, but it's not that interesting.
Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Mayor Peck. About the virtual power plant. I am confused because when I hear about this, I'm always hearing about the city selling power back to PRPA. However, it's my understanding that today the substations we have and the substation meters and other regulatory equipment that regulate the flow of real power are one way. The city is a consumer only. And that to change the city to a producer-consumer, or even one of the city's substations to a producer-consumer, you have to make a capital investment in both substation equipment, which is a moderate amount of cost, and the transmission lines, which are a rather large amount of cost. Mm-hmm. Am I correct so far?
You are correct, but I don't follow the transmission investment because you're talking about the substation upgrade, and we're also talking about in the two-way communication. It's the data that's flowing.
Well, sure. Well, yeah. There's data flowing, but ultimately, I'm surprised that you couched it in those terms, because if Longmont doesn't have excess data, Longmont has excess power.
Right.
And so as the way the mayor asked her question, that I think got deferred to you, was the city sells power back. And I don't understand why you are not modeling first where the city never sells power back, but simply shifts its load, curtails its demand, and allows PRPA to put power where it is most needed based on the virtual power plant. So my question is, are you modeling that scenario where the city delivery substations never have to be two-way?
Right. So, yes, we do model. So in our resource planning model, we do model about 90 to 100 megawatts of energy being available at the cities at different percentages based on the load ratio and based on the forecasts.
Not the 100 megawatts for one city, but among
all the four cities. Because when Platte River looks at it, it is one load node. We serve one load, which is an aggregation of all four cities. So, for example, let's say that there is 10 megawatts of energy storage or distributed generation that is at Longmont. And that energy, and if you remember, I also said the virtual power plant has two steps to it. One is, what does the city need? If there is a reliability need that Daryl and Dave thinks they need it, and they would not move that information forward saying, hey, this 10 megawatts is needed to serve our load right here, right? For the city. And if there are hours that you don't need that, then you tell that this additional 10 megawatts is available for you to do it. This virtual power plant is the mechanism of doing that. Two things. When I say that 10 megawatts, we have modeled it, we are expecting that this load that would have been served by Platte River is serving with its own local generation, which is load reduction.
Yes.
Right?
That's where I'm going, because...
So, virtual power plant, if you've looked at it, has got both demand. The electric vehicles, for example, could be charging an hour, discharging another hour. When it's charging, it's a load. When it's discharging, it's a generator. Demand response, same thing. There are times when you reduce your load. All that information is for me to know how much generation I don't need, that I have excess, that I can sell it to the market. It's a mathematical problem whether you subtract at the load or you subtract at the generation.
I understand. What I am asking you is, are you considering scenarios where Longmont's excess, for example, stored energy,
Right.
or Longmont's current solar generation
Right.
is actually transmitted on the real grid out of Longmont to another city.
So you have to look at this. You are in that scenario, the electrons will flow out of the grid, of the Longmont grid, right?
Yes.
And goes back to the power grid. And
Yes.
once it is there, it is the flow of electrons that are going to serve the load. So when I in your question, if you say that, just let's put some numbers. It may be easy.
Well, wait. I think you're answering a different question than I'm trying to ask.
Okay.
Okay, I'm trying to. There are two scenarios. One is where Longmont physically can, in fact, push electrons back onto the transmission line, and they are consumed somewhere else.
Yep.
It's not really electrons, but anyway, you get it. The other scenario is where it can't. Longmont can store more energy locally. It can use more energy locally. It can demand more energy from PRPA.
Or the grid.
But PRPA cannot demand more energy from Longmont. And in that scenario, there are no capital investments needed at the substation. Correct? And in the scenario where Longmont, in fact, becomes a supplier to another city, there are capital investments needed. So what I'm asking you is, are you modeling the easier scenario where Longmont can increase its demand, curtail its demand, increase its storage, but not ever serve loads in a different city, which is the capability that Longmont has now?
I may still answer it in a different way, but because when you talk about Longmont specifically, when Platte River is modeling the system, it is entire load that we are serving. It is one load that we serve.
I understood that as well, but what I am not understanding is whether you are planning to make the investments in the physical infrastructure of the transmission system, including your half of the substations, so that Longmont can produce power in the network as opposed to simply being a variable load.
Now I follow your question.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So the investment in the distribution generation or the substation upgrade, which could be a non-wire solution or a storage at that, will be part of the, after understanding what is the Inflation Reduction Act, how does that support, that will help us to identify where could we strategically place that distributed generation and the substation upgrades needed that will help your system. What that means is, if I can avoid building a big storage, for example, and say that if I can distribute that storage among 4 cities, what would it need to support those 4 energy storage at the distribution system will definitely be something that we will be analyzing as part of this next IRP study.
Okay, so you are saying that my intuition is that it's cheaper not to upgrade the transmission lines and the substations than it is to do that. So you are saying that, and I'm saying that's just my intuition because I haven't run your model, but I never hear about that part.
Okay.
And it seems to me that that is potentially the least cost scenario. So my question is, are you modeling it?
At this point, we have not, but the next RP24, we will work with the city staff and identify those locations, what would be the right thing to do in terms of cost to serve the load, and if there is an alternate solution. Because till now, things were not looking in a way that it looked like you could do that distributed generation. It didn't have that kind of infrastructure to support it, meaning there were no bills that would make sense for us to do it. Now things have changed in the new with this bill. It's where is the location. We are more independent because the storage is never now doesn't have to be charged with solar. It gets its own investment tax credit. That will change it. That will mean that where is the new location has got more, if that needs more transmission to support that and it's the least cost, that will be part of the analysis in the next resource plan. In the RP22, we said we are expecting 100 megawatts, but now it's going one level deep and saying, okay, now you're asking, what if there is a system upgrade that can be done that's still a least cost solution? We have not done in the past, but that is something that we will look because of the new changes. We have not done that in the past. We have now things are changing. That is the reason we have to look at that.
The mayor doesn't want me to ask any more questions, so I have follow-ups, but I have to ask permission. I don't think my question was answered.
I mean, if I'm allowed.
Yes, please.
I mean, if you're asking, I think there are two parts to your question, right? Like, have I modeled that before? And my answer is no. I've not modeled a distribution system, transmission upgrades at the distribution system. But my next answer, or the part two, is next resource planning, we will look at those things because the system, now there are things in the bill that allows us to look at things like that, which we never were able to look before.
I understand. So my real question is you're not assuming you have to upgrade the substations and the transmission lines. Your least cost solution, if it involves the cities being loads only, is acceptable.
I wouldn't come to that conclusion that we wouldn't look at an upgrade at the substation or because the load's concerned.
I was asking you whether you're looking at the scenario where you don't need to upgrade the substation, because every time I have heard it discussed, you are assuming that you upgrade the substations.
I mean, we are assuming, meaning to support the 100 megawatts, I'm assuming that 100 megawatts that is, or your portion of that 100 megawatts would require some kind of upgrade to the system to support that.
To the distribution system,
Yep.
Yes.
Yes, that's the
But
assumption.
not to the transmission system
Correct.
necessarily.
Correct. But,
Okay, that's what I wanted to get to.
But it's also important, the new renewable resources that we are adding in the portfolio, in that scenario, we are looking at what transmission system upgrades we have to do to bring those renewable energy to serve our load as well.
Of course.
Yep.
For the remote ones.
Yep.
Thank you, Raj. Are there any more questions? I think we're good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good evening. Good evening, Mayor Peg, Mayor Pro Tem Rodriguez, council members. Respectful people's times, I wanted to kind of summarize on behalf of Platte River kind of the main takeaways from our presentation and ask, of course, many questions. Key highlights that we want, that Raj kind of mentioned, is our conclusion of our resource planning guide as we described as our blueprint. We concluded in 2020. Internally, we have some new organizational structures, some new expertise around communications and transition and technology we'll add on board with Raj and I and couplers on board. Our board did approve our zero portfolio for both our IRP and our clean energy plan. And as Raj mentioned, we do have an update already currently in the queue. So what's in the implementation phase, as which Jason might have mentioned, is that we're currently in the request for proposals. With the changes to legislation, there could be an impact, which may be a reduction, obviously, hopefully, in terms of the rate pressure, but we're still monitoring that. And then in terms of our strategic plan for the company as a whole, not only looking at our workforce transformation in terms of our employees, but also kind of looking ahead towards our future so we can, the way I like to see it is 50 years ago, the organization was born out of the owner communities, and now it's the next 50 years of investment and innovation, strategically outlining that for both the board and our owner communities to understand. And we can't say this enough, collaboration with our owner communities around the integration and data systems that we're going to be implementing. And this is a good chart that I think summarizes some of the things that we talked about today. The acceleration of our intermittent resources, right? shows the reduction. And I want to make a point that that 90% reduction is in this point in time. You know, as we look ahead for the last, how do you get to the last 100% of the non-carbon, that 10% goal, working with our owner communities on the integration, data system integrations around our work around that virtual power plant that Raj is discussing. And if you notice kind of the impact of our reduction in hydro, right? The carbon reduction and the impact that we're doing. So if I had to summarize, it is the implementation of acceleration of our resources, the intermittent work, the need for dispatchable resources that we're going to need to make some decisions on that may include thermal or not, and looking ahead towards what our portfolio will look like after our rate pressures that you'll see in a consecutive period of, let's say, 5 or 6 years. Hopefully then it decreases after 2030. And at least in my wheelhouse, you know, I'm going to take this opportunity. You know, we've been meeting with your staff, with both Becky and Scott and Daryl and Dave, on working on how to create what it sounds like to me is a better communication to work together. Right? There's a lot of complexity in this, and I think understanding and explaining to our communities kind of the impact. You know, what is the impact to their bill? What is the value proposition that this change in portfolio is doing, and then our engagement in our own communities in a way that you hadn't seen before, and I think we look forward to having that partnership. So I'm respectful for people's times because I know we're a little over, but we certainly take any more questions from the council. We appreciate this opportunity, and we look forward to continuing this conversation.
Seeing no questions, I thank you very much for this presentation. It was very helpful, and I personally liked the way the PowerPoint took us through it step by step. Who? Oh, I see, Councillor Waters. Number 8, you snuck in.
Yeah, honestly, this is probably for Jason more than I appreciate all the information, and it's less about power generation than it's about kind of corporate priorities and incentives. I assume you made a point, Jason, earlier that for decades, right, the priority was reliability and affordability. And I assume that if I was on your board, I'm sure your board created incentives to make certain that those priorities drove management thinking, strategy, resource allocation, et cetera. Could you just share kind of just conceptually, I'm not trying to dig into your compensation schemes, but to the degree to which the commitment to zero carbon is tied to your incentives for you and for your senior staff. Is that a corporate priority, and is it reflected in how you guys earn bonuses?
Yeah, all the way throughout the entire organization. But I would generalize it more to say I wouldn't point towards, because carbon reduction is volatile, right? You have to look at the trend and over a period of time.
Sure.
But we take a step back, and a portion of incentive is based upon reliability metrics, right? A portion of it's on affordability metrics, and another third of it is on environmental responsibility. And carbon reduction is a part of that. There are a lot of other compliance obligations environmentally to operate the existing facilities we have. You can imagine.
So a third of that incentive program is reflected the sustainability. I should have framed it as a sustainability priority.
Yeah, it's incorporated into all of that. And
that's helpful to know.
Yeah, and then I think if you take another layer back and look at it, you look at the strategic plan of the organization. I know personally when I get my review from the board, right, we go over, hey, there's the 4 initiatives in the strategic plan. We're in year 3 of it. You thought you'd be here. You're here. That's what we discuss. And why? We're ahead in some areas, behind in some areas.
I think that's to know that we're all pulling hard in the same direction or pushing hard in the same direction.
And the point I want to make to answer your question is it's throughout the whole organization.
Not just you. It's top to bottom.
It's not just senior managers or directors. It's all the way down to an accountant.
Yep.
But they all have a role to play in it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Now, do I see any other comments? Nobody's sneaking in here? Okay, thank you very much again. We really appreciated it. So let's take a 5-minute break before we do the next presentation. So we are ready for our second presentation. No, this is Land Development Code amendments.
You don't want me to present on Platte River Power
No, I don't.
Authority, I don't think.
Yeah, we're done with that one.
It'd be entertaining at best. Good evening, Mayor Peck, members of council. I'm Erin Fosdick with the Planning and Development Services Department. I'm joined tonight by Zach Blazak, our Environmental and Sustainability Planner, and Ben Ortiz, our Transportation Planner. And we're going to talk to you about Land Development Code updates related to the Main Street Corridor Plan. We have a short presentation for you. Obviously, we provided information in your council packet, but what we really want to do tonight is just do a little bit of background on the Main Street Corridor Plan. I know most of you are pretty familiar with this plan, so we're not going to spend a lot of time on that. And then we're really going to spend the bulk of our time talking about the proposed code amendments. Zach's going to go through the proposed red line ordinances that were included in your packet, and this is really intended to be like a zero reading. We're not introducing these, obviously, on first reading, as this is a study session, but we wanted you to see the changes that you've initially directed us through the Main Street Corridor Plan acceptance to make. So Zach will go through those and get into some additional details. I do want to take this opportunity to note, and Zach will reiterate this, these amendments are not intended to impact existing businesses, so we can talk a little bit more about other opportunities for future code amendments, but do want to get that out there, that these amendments are really not intended to impact existing businesses along the corridor. Also want to mention that these amendments are part of a larger suite of amendments, and so you'll see in the packet there's some additional Main Street Corridor Plan amendments that we can talk a little bit more about. There's also additional amendments that Council is aware of that the Planning Department has been working on. I know Glenn spent some time with you all talking about those, and you probably just talked about those a little bit this evening. But those are work on housing incentives, the historic code updates, industrial design standards, and some other things. So those aren't included in tonight's discussion, but I do just want to remind Council that this Main Street Corridor Plan amendments are part of those larger code amendments that planning has been working on. Also want to mention that as we were working on these updates related to the Main Street Corridor Plan, we did note that there may be some additional items Council wants to consider in the future, and those may be related to some of our greenhouse gas reduction goals, some of our other sustainability or equity-related goals. And so we haven't included anything above and beyond what was recommended in the Main Street Corridor Plan in those red line ordinance, the attachments that you have. But we will spend a little bit of time tonight talking about some of those options in case Council wants to direct staff to take a look at future amendments. So again, Zach will go through the red lines and what we're proposing that's related to the corridor plan, and then we'll talk about some additional options if Council's interested. We do hope to get direction tonight on the red line ordinances that are in your packet. So as I mentioned, I want to take just a second refreshing Council's memory on the Main Street Corridor Plan, which was accepted by Council in October 2019. This plan, as you'll recall, provides a vision for the 5-mile long Main Street corridor that stretches from Plateau Road on the south all the way up to Highway 66 on the north, and obviously spans Main Street. The plan does identify 4 character areas, which you can see here. The purpose of the plan was really to develop a vision for the corridor, identify those areas of strength and stability along the corridor, as well as some opportunities for areas of change. The plan really sets forth a plan for revitalization and redevelopment of the corridor and really emphasizes those catalyst development sites and transportation improvements to help us enhance mobility and create a sense of place. The plan also contained a number of land use recommendations, and those are in your council comm as a reminder. But these are really important for us to think about as we talk about the code amendments tonight. It's part of the why behind what we're bringing you tonight. So several of the proposed amendments directly support these recommendations, such as providing additional opportunities for mixed-use development and residential development within the corridor, diversifying and enhancing the economic base through strategic infill, focusing on those catalyst sites and areas of change when considering redevelopment, and probably most importantly is creating and enhancing that overall sense of place throughout the corridor. So these updates that we're talking about tonight are one piece of plan implementation. Obviously, there's a whole host of other actions that are contained in the plan. We're not going to go through those tonight, but these code amendments are really critical in helping us start to realize that vision that's articulated in the plan. I'm happy to provide more information on the Main Street Corridor Plan, but hopefully that kind of sets the stage. I do also want to mention in terms of timing, obviously this plan was accepted in late 2019. It's obviously 2022. We had a little bit of a hold up, so to say, with COVID. And so kind of the why now is we're getting back around to this. We've been able to return to the implementation work for this plan and are really pleased to bring you these initial amendments. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Zach, and he's going to walk through the amendments to both 1504, which is the use standards, and 1505, which is parking.
Thank you, Aaron. Good evening, Mayor Peck, members of council. For those of you who I haven't met yet, my name's Zach. I'm the Environmental Sustainability Planner in a new role here with the city. And my role in this was specifically to go through and actually work these red lines. So that's what I'm here to talk to you about tonight. So the first that I want to discuss is with 1504 in the table of allowed uses. This table is the tool that planners use to kind of determine A, whether a use is allowed in a zone district, and B, what mechanism of approval will go through to actually permit that use. So what we're looking at here is a list of the vehicle and equipment oriented related uses, and those include car washes, equipment sales, vehicle rentals, parking lots, vehicle fueling stations, vehicle repair and maintenance, and vehicle sales. And what changes we're proposing here or recommending here for you include taking what we currently have in the mixed-use downtown, which doesn't permit a whole lot of these uses or only permits them by conditional use, and making that consistent in the mixed-use corridor, which is the zone district to the north and south on either side for the most part. So basically changing the mechanism by which any of these uses are approved. So you want to have a gas station on Main Street in the mixed-use corridor. Right now you could come in and get that permitted. What we are saying here in these recommendations is to come in and permit them by a conditional use process if it's in the corridor, and potentially not at all if it's adjacent to Main Street directly. And that's what the second portion of this goes through. So 1504-030, the use-specific standards, this is the tool that the planners use to actually go through and review, and it sets use-specific standards specific to that individual property. So again, the recommendation that this is making would prohibit new drive-through, car wash, vehicle repair and maintenance, those types of uses. And again, Aaron touched on this earlier. Just to be clear, this recommendation would not affect any of the existing auto-oriented uses that are currently on a property adjacent to Main Street. So your gas station that's open on North Main, you would still be able to run that gas station, and you would still be able to come in and make modifications to that gas station if they were to come in and go through the process correctly. That makes sense to everybody so far? Okay, good. The next section that we are making recommendations for is in the parking section, and there's two recommendations that we're making here. This is in 1505. Oh, sorry. Thank you, Aaron. This is in 1505-080, which in this section, planners typically use this to actually perform their review to make sure that we're looking at a plan. The plan is in conformance with our actual regulations. So that's what this is. Right now, in this section, there is a requirement that the cost of the parking be included in the sale or lease of any multifamily residential unit that's built in any zone district, and that's part of a code that. Sorry, hang on. There's a minimum parking requirement for residential land uses, and there's a maximum parking requirement for pretty much all other non-residential. Right now. Oh my gosh, sorry. I'm literally looking at two different notes. My apologies. Let me step back to this first one. The cost of parking in the bundling requirement is included in the cost of rent. That's the requirement that we're recommending that be removed. The other portion here in 1505-080E, which would consider revisions to minimum off-street parking spaces required for multifamily development. So again, right now, there is a minimum requirement for all new residential land uses that are coming in to be built. And what this would do is lift that minimum and replace it with a maximum parking requirement. So you have your really awesome infill residential that you want to come in with, and right now it's impossible to build on that property because we have a minimum parking requirement that would take up X amount of space. This recommendation would, again, remove that minimum and replace it with a maximum and give some of those properties that might have great potential a little more flexibility. So I think that's everything that I meant to cover. Did I confuse anyone by messing up the parking spot back there? Okay. All right, I'm turning it back over to Erin now. Thank you.
Thanks, Zach. One thing I do want to mention, since Zach wasn't able to confuse you, I want to try to confuse you. The communication is written correctly. We did notice tonight while we were out pilfering at the enchilada bar, we noticed that the way the red line ordinance is written is slightly misleading. And so if we're directed to bring these red lines back, we'd want to make one correction before first reading. The way that, as Zach mentioned, what we're looking to do is in residential zones in the mixed-use corridor and mixed-use downtown, we'd like to go from residential parking minimums to residential parking maximums. That's consistent with a change we made a number of years ago for many non-residential uses, and it's been working really well. Unfortunately, what we ended up with in the red line ordinance that you'll see in your packet is just removing minimum parking requirements. And while the intent is essentially the same and we might get to the same goals, what that really does from a code perspective is removes all parking requirements, including maximums for non-residential uses too. And so we don't want to go the other way and have someone provide too much parking. So if we're directed to bring back these amendments, we would make that small change. And again, the communication is written correctly. So if you read the communication and didn't pour through the actual code text, then you're on the same page as us. And what Zach said is correct. So I just wanted to make that small note for you. As I mentioned, there's some other updates, and you'll see these in the attachment from the Main Street Corridor Plan. These are not included yet, but we still intend to work on these. So I just want to mention we'll be taking a look at some of those other recommendations with future code updates. And that would be taking a look at zoning districts, density and dimensional standards, and things like landscaping and streetscape requirements. So some of these, like zoning districts and zoning changes to be more aligned with the character areas, would require some additional property owner outreach, some additional analysis, and so we haven't had a chance to do that. Some of these, for example, the density and dimensional requirements, we may be able to handle through revisions associated with the steam and sugar factory plan, but we want to let that planning process move forward. And then some, like landscaping and streetscape requirements, we may need to bring in some outside help to create those design standards. And so again, those will be future updates. Those obviously are part of the direction that was given when the plan was accepted, but we haven't included those. So just kind of put a pin in these for now. And then for the second portion of the presentation, we really wanted to talk about some additional future code updates that council could consider, specifically related to auto-oriented uses and parking. So we put some additional information in your packet. I'm not going to read through all of that, but really these changes are things that council could look at either for the additional changes in the mixed-use corridor and mixed-use downtown, or other changes throughout the city. So for example, the changes included in your packet, as Zach mentioned, make most auto-oriented uses a conditional use, meaning they're a major development application that would now require a public hearing if this change was made. Many of these would still not be conditional in other districts, so that's a change we could look at if council wanted to pursue additional changes in other areas of the city. We could also look at additional location standards or prohibition of uses. Some cities are taking a look at auto-oriented uses and thinking about ways to prohibit those uses either over time or for new uses, so that's something that council could consider if you're interested in going further than what's being proposed right now. For parking, again, these proposed amendments are targeting residential parking requirements in the mixed-use corridor and mixed-use downtown. We've heard from council on a number of occasions that you may be interested in looking at additional parking modifications in other zoning districts, other residential zoning districts, or other mixed-use districts outside of the Main Street corridor. And so if council's interested in making some additional changes to parking requirements in other areas of the city, we'd be interested in having that direction and discussion tonight. And then, of course, obviously, council is welcome to give us any other feedback on code amendments and ideas that you have that we haven't included. So we're going to conclude on this slide, and we have a couple questions for council. Question number 1 is really related to the proposed amendments that are included in the 2 red line ordinances in your packet. And we're interested in getting direction from council on if we are ready to bring those back on first reading. So again, the process for creating these changes in the code would be to bring back an ordinance on first reading and then second reading and public hearing. And again, those would be changes to 1504. That would be changes to the table of permitted uses that Zach went through. Again, changing from permitted to conditional uses and some additional standards for auto-oriented uses. And then the changes to 1505, which again would change residential parking requirements from minimums to maximums in the mixed-use downtown and mixed-use corridor zoning districts. So that's kind of the first question. I think what I'll do is stop there and see if there's questions or discussion on sort of the proposed amendments before you, and then we can tackle the other 2 questions on if there's other changes that you'd like staff to pursue at a future time.
Councillor Hidalgo-Ferring.
Thank you, Mayor. So my question is in regard to the 1504 around the auto-oriented, putting that conditional. Is that the goal of that was really to eliminate the amount of traffic? Is that, I was trying to read through and really find out what are we hoping to resolve or solve with this? With this piece, maybe I need my memory refreshed.
Mayor Pett, Councilmember Hidalgo-Ferring, really this is part of the suite of amendments that are aimed at creating a more mixed-use, pedestrian-friendly corridor. Okay. And so, as Zach and I both mentioned, the intent is not to eliminate the existing auto-oriented uses that are there today, but to potentially provide some space for other maybe non-auto-oriented uses in the future. A conditional use process is typically a little bit more involved than a use by right where someone can just come in with a site plan, as Zach talked about. So a conditional use is going to require a neighborhood meeting. It's going to also require a trip to Planning Commission with a public hearing. And so there's a little bit more opportunity for neighborhoods and for the public to weigh in, more opportunity for Planning Commission to evaluate those uses in terms of compatibility, in terms of that public process. So really the intent is to make it, frankly, a little bit tougher for new auto-oriented businesses to come in. Maybe tougher is the wrong word. Maybe some additional process is a better way to think about it, so that we can, again, try to start encouraging some more pedestrian-friendly mixed-use development within the corridor. If you recall, the Main Street Corridor Plan really talks about, again, adding some more mixed use, more residential. Those don't tend to be, they're not always incompatible with auto-oriented uses, but I think if we think about places like downtown where we don't have as many auto-oriented uses, those do tend to be more pedestrian-friendly, more mixed use, more supportive of walkability. And so that's really what these changes are getting at.
Okay, I thought it had, it was in relation to the walkability piece. So really to clarify, it's not necessarily prohibiting these businesses. It's really just changing how we would move forward the process on how some of these, like a gas station, if they wanted to come up, they would change the process and how they could get approved.
Mayor Peck, Councilmember Hidalgo-Ferring, that's correct to some extent, but we should be clear that for some uses, there would be a prohibition on new uses on lots fronting Main Street. And so as we think about consolidating access and creating, again, a more pedestrian-oriented corridor with fewer drive accesses, fewer, entries and exits for cars, some of those new uses would be prohibited on Main Street. We wouldn't allow them on a lot adjacent to Main Street. So they could locate in other areas in the mixed-use corridor, but not on a lot directly adjacent to Main Street. And those are in those specific use standards that are after the table.
Okay. And then I do have another question on 1505 in regard to the parking. So I think, existing, and one that glares in my mind is, and it's in my ward, is where I think Big Lots, are they still there? So I know ARC is there, where Kmart used to be, and that large empty parking lot, it is never filled to capacity. So these changes would address new development, not necessarily what's there. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
I also want to mention that is a catalyst site in the Main Street Corridor Plan. So that is a site that's been identified as a great redevelopment potential, and I think parking lots serve that role. So we wouldn't force someone to redevelop their parking lot, but certainly we'd like to encourage that. And I think that's where that notion of parking maximums really comes in.
Okay.
If a new development comes in, we want to ensure potentially that they're not providing maybe more parking than what would be needed.
Okay, great. Thank
I
you.
don't know, Ben, do you have anything you want to add to that?
No, you stated that very well. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the clarification.
Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Mayor Peck. I just wanted to express my support for A and B. I think that they are very nicely done, and I really like not having any more of those on Main. What I think is I would like to get onto the record is, those auto-oriented businesses make the sidewalk have more cars crossing the sidewalk. A drive-through does that, for example, and also they can tend to back up the traffic on Main, slow down the flow of traffic, and so both of those things are really good for making it more pedestrian friendly to not add to that. And I did want to say again too, because some of the public's reaction to the newspaper article was, a little bit panicky, and we do need to emphasize that this is not going to affect the businesses that are already there unless they want to reconfigure themselves, right? Unless they want to redevelop on their lot, and then some of this stuff might come in or might not, still won't come in.
Mayor Peck, Councilmember Martin, we've taken a look at a couple scenarios, and I'll try not to get too nerdy on the code, but there's a provision in the code that essentially says if something was established legally and now is a conditional use, we will deem that it has conditional use approval. That's not the exact language, but essentially that's the intent of the code. So let's say we have a gas station that has been on North Main for some time. We'll say it has approval, and if these changes are made, we'd say it was approved. It's an approved conditional use. If they wanted to come in and do some changes to their site, they would basically go through a site plan process. There could be an instance where, let's say, a gas station wanted to purchase a lot next to them and build a car wash, that then there may be some issues because that would be a new lot adjacent to Main Street, and there could be some prohibitions. But I think in your example where an existing business is wanting to do some revitalization, maybe even an expansion, they would be allowed to. With these changes, we're not creating non-conforming uses. We're not creating prohibited uses. If they were changing the use, if someone came in and wanted to tear down an office building and build a gas station directly on Main Street, that would be prohibited if these changes were approved, something like that.
But if I wanted to change a plain vanilla gas station to a quick shop, for example, that would probably be okay. If it stayed in its
right, a gas station being redeveloped as a gas station, a car dealership redeveloping as a car dealership, obviously they would need to comply with the requirements of the code, which, there may be some upgrades needed in terms of design standards or landscaping, lighting, things of that nature. But certainly, yes, we would take them through a process. There wouldn't be a prohibition on a use being revitalized.
Thank you.
Thank you. I do have a couple of questions as well on 1505. When I'm looking at the code, page 1, it's line 19. You have number 3 there at the exemption. Just as a clarification, it says properties located within the GID are exempt from minimum and maximum parking requirements. I don't understand that. Why? From both requirements, minimum and maximum?
Mayor Peck, several years ago, there did not used to be a parking requirement in the general improvement district. And that was inadvertently removed. And so this basically goes back to that original policy.
Oh, okay. And one other in the same 1505. This is line 7, number 6. It's about on-street parking. I'll just read a little bit of it. A lot containing single-family attached or multifamily dwellings may satisfy the minimum off-street parking requirement based on city evaluation by parking on adjacent local collector streets, and will be evaluated on a case-by-case basis. So as I picture this, collector streets would be residential streets.
Mayor Peck, we do have some collector streets in town that are residential. Good example, I believe, is Spencer Street and Mountain View Avenue, both of which have some residential on them. But they're sort of serve an intermediary function. So your local streets are basically those that provide local access to residential, and then your collector streets collect traffic from the local streets and feed them to the arterials, and the arterials are the big main streets. So what we've done is in the MUD and MUC, we're basically stating there's no minimum parking requirement. For the remainder of the city, however, there will be a minimum parking requirement. So when we have a new development that comes in and they say, well, you know, we'd like to be able to utilize some of this available on-street parking to meet our minimum parking requirement, if we look at it and say, you know, it's really underutilized, we could go ahead and say, you know, that might be a good use for that street side parking, because then they're not providing more pavement on the actual property itself, the new property itself, the new development itself. They can utilize that property for other things, more units perhaps, or more common open space, that sort of thing. But again, we'd have to look at it on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah, you did say that. And my concern is when you say the development doesn't want to or isn't going to provide enough parking and residents can park on adjacent streets, are we saying that they could park in front of someone else's house? And especially, I'm thinking of both historic districts on both sides. Some of these older homes don't have garages themselves, so they're using the off-street parking for their. Is that how I'm interpreting this or not?
Mayor Peck, so we have taken that under consideration, and generally what we have when we come up with a circumstance such as this, we're really only looking at the parking immediately adjacent and on the same side of the street as the new development. So we're not talking about available parking a block away, 2 blocks away, that could impact other neighborhoods.
Okay, I just wanted to bring that up because I can see a lot of problems coming from neighbors but I do trust that you're going to look at this on a case-by-case basis.
And we probably should have mentioned, there's a couple changes in 1505 that are what I would deem like cleanup changes, and this is one of those. So we're sort of clarifying in this section, putting that additional wording that we're evaluating it on a case-by-case basis, and the intent I don't think is changing. I mean, this is essentially what's allowed in the code now. We're just adding some additional language to really clarify how staff is evaluating that.
Okay, thank you for that. So, do you have anything more on this presentation, or is this it? We want to, I'm sorry, you want direction on this. So I'll open it up to council. Do you want to, anybody want to give direction on these? Do we want to accept all 3 of them? Do we want to, I know that Councilor Martin said she agreed with A and B on number 1. She wants to go with that. Do we want any additional changes to auto-oriented uses? Seeing none. Oh, Councilor Martin.
Thank you, Mayor Peck. We didn't really discuss 2 and 3 yet. I do have some questions about 2, which is you know, on North Main specifically, we've got a big, a lot of places where essentially there is a frontage road parallel to Main. You know, that where you go in and out of the pad, and then there are fewer entrances onto Main. And this isn't exactly auto orientation, but rather it's multimodal transit orientation. And the piece from Advanced Longmont or from Envision Longmont that you included in the packet spoke to this a little bit. Is there any opportunity for using that frontage road space, reconfiguring that so that you get better buffered bike lanes, you know, things that promote pedestrian and bicycling and e-cycling and all of that? It seems like that would also add to the pedestrian-friendly, you know, character of it. Has there been any thought about that?
Mayor Peck, Council Member Martin, that's a good catch. The Main Street Corridor Plan had a lot of recommended transportation improvements. And so if you look at that plan, we do show what the existing cross-section looks like, what an interim, you know, from keeping the curbs the same might look like, but how we could accommodate different modes in a maybe better way. And then what an ultimate cross-section could look like within Main Street. I will say that we focused mostly on changes within the right-of-way, and in areas on North Main, kind of like where you're talking about, the right-of-way is large. So there's more room potentially to maybe do even like a grade separated lane, or to do some type of separation. Obviously there's some areas that already have pretty wide sidewalks. And so we have thought about that within the right of way. I don't think that we've really contemplated what that kind of network change could look like, utilizing some of those, frankly, parking lot drive aisles. So that would be something that we'd have to take a look at. That wasn't part of the planning effort. Certainly as properties redevelop, you know, we talked about some of the catalyst sites that were identified. I think there are opportunities to infill some of those parking lots and to potentially create additional pedestrian and bikeways. Potentially there's some transit improvements that could be made, and the plan does contemplate some of that, but we haven't really identified, for example, a network that would utilize those drive aisles for something like what you're suggesting, but it's something that maybe could be considered as redevelopment occurs.
Okay. Any other changes? Anyone else have a change that they would like to see? Nope. So how about number 3? How about parking requirements? Are there any thoughts or changes?
So I think here really what we're after is, you know, we're proposing these changes in the mixed-use downtown and mixed-use corridor. There's several other mixed-use zoning districts. We also have a residential multifamily district. You had a chance to take a look at the multifamily parking study that Ben worked with a planning graduate student on, that showed relatively lower utilization in some of our multifamily projects. And so we're really interested in if we should take a broader look at those parking requirements. Certainly we know council has been spending a lot of time on affordable and attainable housing. That's one of the things that we hear from the development community, is that parking requirements can certainly add costs. And so we've proposed some unbundling in the code, but are interested if you'd want us to take a look at either looking at parking maximums in other areas, potentially looking at different parking ratios, maybe something else entirely is really what we're after here. Councilor Waters.
So yeah, I would like to see some options. What would really be helpful to me is to as you think about unbundling and the parking issues that come to you and have come to us from time to time, is to get clear on what we're trying to accomplish, right? Like what's the objective, or 2 or 3, and what are the code changes that would help accomplish that objective or those objectives, right? So it's in general language, or it's in specific language. When we get the code language, it would be if we could take it up a level. From my perspective, what are we trying to accomplish? How does this get us there? And then what's the code required to get us there? Does it make sense? So I think we're headed in the right direction. But it would be helpful for me to get a little bit greater clarity on exactly what we're trying to accomplish with whatever the changes you're going to bring back to us. Does it make sense?
One clarifying question. Are you talking about the changes that we've already proposed, or
No,
the
I'm talking
future
about.
changes?
I'm talking about the
parking
future
changes.
changes.
Okay.
Yeah. No,
yep.
I'm supportive of what you brought. I'm talking about. Does the council want to consider additional changes to parking requirements? Yeah. Tell me. I'd like to see to accomplish these objectives. Here's the way we would do that, and here's the code that we would need to see or change in order to accomplish that. All of it consistent with. I mean, it all folds into the Main Street Corridor Plan, right? I'm a fan of what you've done. I think you know that. But there are, for each of the character areas, there are objectives that we need to accomplish. We've been around that to some degree, but this is a little more specific, and that'd be helpful to frame it that way.
Okay.
So I agree with the unbundling. I would like to see some different options on parking requirements to unbundle that. But I agree with what you're doing as well. I always try to look at the unintended consequences. Is that we're thinking about having multi-story apartment buildings, hopefully on South and North Main. But we're also talking about not having enough parking for people who live there. If we have 300 apartments, what does that do to our traffic? What, are we looking into the future? Are we doing it together? And that, I don't want one decision to cause a huge problem on another issue in our city. So Ben is well aware of that, I'm sure. So I just want to keep that in mind when we do unbundle these, when we do look at parking requirements. We also have to look at the traffic and where people are going to be parking. They're going to park their cars somewhere. To say people aren't going to have cars is a huge hope. But at this point in time, I don't think that's viable. So just keep that in mind. Thank you.
So just to summarize, it sounds like we will bring forward the red lines with that one minor adjustment that I talked about on first reading at some point at a relatively soon council meeting. And then we'll hold tight on auto-oriented uses, and if council changes their mind and wants us to look at some additional options in other areas of the city or additional changes in one of these zones we're talking about, you can let us know. And we will start exploring some options for additional changes to our parking requirements, potentially citywide, potentially in the mixed-use corridor and mixed-use downtown, building on what we're going to bring back in the near future. Is that a fair summary?
It is.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So now we're open to mayor and council comments. Do we have any? Seeing none, and we're not going to have a city manager or city attorney comments tonight as well. So with that, can I have a motion to adjourn? Moved by Councilor Waters, seconded by Councilor Martin. Let's just raise our hands. All those in favor? We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.